What it was like growing up. Why did you join the military? Tell me where you grew up and kind of give me a background. Did you have family members that were in the military or okay? So go ahead and just tell me where you grew up and what it was like growing up as a kid.
Okay. I grew up in a podunk town in the Northwest. I lived in the Northwest basically my whole life other than the Army sending me on excursions. So I've been blessed to live in a rural area and have access to a bigger city. And being able to experience 4 seasons and those things, what a huge blessing. You go other places and find out that they don't have just an abundance of fresh water or fresh air or fresh whatever. And so to be able to hunt or ski or hike or whatever you want to do, we had access to that as a kid. I grew up out of town, so in a lot of ways it's kind of a charmed child period, I guess you could say, in a lot of ways. I grew up kind of poor, but otherwise, I mean, we didn't want for food, we didn't want for clothes. I was always on the lower end of the spectrum, hands down, and that sucked. But I grew up, out of town. We had tons of space. We lived on like 5 acres. We had a creek that ran through it, and we just got to go play every day in the summer. And we rode our bikes, and it was stuff that, in a lot of ways, they make movies about. So it was just beautiful. Mountains everywhere, animals all over the place, all kinds of cool stuff to do.
Okay, so tell me how you came about joining the Army, and then kind of go through the progression of your career up to this point. Like,
okay.
Somebody inspired you, or you're like, hey, I need to do something, or whatever. But go ahead and start from there. Just how you came about joining the Army, whether it was active duty or you went guard afterwards, or kind of the story. Yeah.
Okay. So senior year of high school, I'm trying to figure out what it is I'm going to do with my life. I've always gotten good grades. I'm a smart guy, but like I said, I'm from Podunk, and there's not a lot of opportunity there. So you got to go off to college or go off somewhere else to kind of find much opportunity. And before I could do that, I made a couple of typical teenage mistakes. Did some drinking with some friends and got caught. Got an MIP, and so that put me in a position where my mom freaked out. My mom was like, oh my gosh, you got to do something or you're going to end up stuck in this town forever and you got a ton of potential. So she wanted me to talk to somebody, a recruiter, about joining the military, so it would give me an opportunity to take a look at other things, way outside of the box, if you will. And I did, and it wasn't a recruiter initially. It was a guy that had been a warrant officer in the military, and he just planted some incredible seeds and told me that I had an opportunity to do something huge if I wanted to. And he just introduced me to those ideas, and I thought, what the heck, I may as well take a look at it. So sat down with the recruiter and just realized that this really was an opportunity for me to do things I was never going to get to do, as a regular person. When he showed me helicopters, he had my full attention. I wasn't interested in Humvees or tanks or anything like that. Those are cool, guns are cool, but they didn't have my attention. When he showed me helicopters, it really hit me for the first time in my life. Wow, that's something I'm probably not going to do anywhere else. And so we started exploring those opportunities, and the Army recruited me pretty hard. The other services recruited me as well. I tested incredibly well, so they were eager to get me, but the Army really pursued me. So I ended up joining the Guard and did basic training in AIT, and I'd been home for less than 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks actually, and 9/11 happened. And I tell you what, that was scary. One of the selling points was we haven't had a war in 10 years, yada, yada, yada. I was a kid for Desert Storm, so I remember it, but it was a blip. Desert Storm was kind of us showing up and kicking down doors and end of story. So I wasn't worried about a war. There wasn't a conflict going on. I thought, hey, this will pay for college. Kind of that typical Guard attitude, right? Hey, they're going to pay me to go to college. There's an enlistment bonus. Gosh, this is going to open some doors. Let's go do this. And I come back, and 9/11 happened, and suddenly the uniform had a whole new meaning. And I was Guard the entire way. So I did 6 years as a Chinook guy. Could have done a deployment, but I blew my knee out, and they said, you know what, you're not going to pass the medical, just stay home. So I said, okay. Recouped, rehabbed, got myself back together, and re-enlisted as a Black Hawk guy. And I did that knowing there was a 95% chance I was going to deploy. And sure enough, 7 months later, I ended up deploying to Iraq and did about a 1.5 deployment there. That was tough. Young guy, married, kids, young kids, one kid at the time. And that was a long, tough deployment. I was there for the surge, came back, stuck around, re-enlisted for a few more years, decided to become a Lakota guy so I could take a little more time focusing on my family instead of having to travel quite a bit for the Guard, so that kept me local. I remember as a guy on that first 6-year enlistment thinking, there is no way I will do anything more than this first 6 years. I'll do 6 years, I'll be happy I did it, and I will get out and move on my way. And I just hit 16 years a couple months ago, and so I laugh about that. It's 10 years I wasn't planning on, and it's come with the cost. There have been some pounds of flesh given along the way, if you will, 2 deployments in that timeline, but it's been a huge blessing to me in a lot of ways. Great friendships, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of incredible life stories that I've got from that time as well. So it's benefited both parties.
So talk to me about, so was it a year and a half, like, or did you do 6 months at a time and come back, or was it like a year and a half time frame?
No, the Army doesn't do the 6-month deal. That's an Air Force, Air Force gets the vacation version.
Sure.
The Marines.
The Guard was even lighter than that.
Yeah, I know. I've got some friends that are Air Force, and they're doing 3-month deployments, or they're picking up 60-day rotations.
Different now. They changed it for us.
Right.
Yeah, it's like you guys are doing 6 months.
Yeah, and they changed it for the Army too. So the Army does 9-month stuff now, but so we did. It was 16 and a half months all said and done. So our mobilization was 4.5 months. That was just prep for the deployment, and they went out of their way to make that tough so that we'd be prepared for the deployment.
Sure.
And I suppose now with separation, I can appreciate that, but during it, oh man, it was hell. Yeah. We went 100 days without a day off, right, just to prove that we could do it. They wanted to prove to us that we could handle it, I suppose. So you do 100 days, 12 hours a day guaranteed. Usually it's 14 or 16, but 12 hours a day is a minimum for 100 days. They wanted to prove to us that we were stronger than we thought. So 4.5 months for the mobilization, and then a year actually in country. So I was gone for 4.5 months, came home for about 8 days, gone for 7 months, came home for 15 days, and then gone for 5 months, and then came back.
So during this deployment at any point, obviously, being in the Army, the chances of you being in a life-threatening situation, with me being in the Air Force, there's opportunities, obviously, but with the Army and Marines, stuff like that, there's obviously more opportunity. Did you find yourself in a position where, did you ever feel like, your life was in danger you obviously do, I guess, when you're there, mm-hmm, but like specific incidents or a story or something like that where that really impacted you, like you're like, holy, this is like you don't get any more real than this at this point. Yeah,
so I was fortunate enough being an aviation guy, I didn't have to deal with IEDs and those type of things, so that was a huge blessing in and of itself right there. But we had birds get shot up, come back with bullets in them, bullet holes in them. We had guys, with some pretty close calls getting shot at. Personally, for me, I will never forget my first flight, as a crew chief in Iraq. And it's a night flight. The majority of our flying was done at night because that's the safest time to fly, especially during the surge. Things were incredibly intense during that timeline. And our first flight, you got to realize, 2 weeks before this, I'm in America. So you go from training, which is notional at best, to suddenly you're in a war zone. And it just doesn't really click until you actually experience it. And so here we are, we leave the base, and we're flying into downtown Baghdad. We got to go in and land here. And we're about 5 minutes out from landing, and I'm looking out my window. It's a training flight, right? They're teaching us where the LZs are and what to look for and how to make the calls and how to make all the correct operational steps on approach and departure. And I remember we're about 5 minutes out, and I look out the window, and there's this incredible gunfight happening. And you gotta remember, this is all at night, so I'm wearing goggles. I can see everything crystal clear. Tracers are super obvious. And this isn't just like guys shooting at each other from across a valley. This is guys shooting at each other from 100 yards apart. And heavy machine gun stuff. This isn't just AR-15, M16 stuff. This is heavy machine gun. We're talking, there's guys in towers guys on the ground, and there's a full-on war zone happening underneath me. And it hit me dead in the chest. How did I get here? I was just in America 2 weeks ago, training. We're in Kuwait for whatever, getting ready. And then you get here and nothing prepares you for that. There's no training you can do that simulates a machine gun fight happening beneath you and witnessing it and realizing you could very well be on the receiving end of that. You could very well be engaged in that. That was my very first flight. I literally felt like I was in a movie. And it was, I don't want to say it was harrowing. I don't want to make it sound like it was something that it wasn't, but it was sobering for sure. Because it's one thing to go through a range, and test fire. It's one thing to go through a range and work on accuracy. It's one thing to do, in-flight tests and all that jazz. It's entirely a different deal when you're suddenly witnessing machine gun fights. So there were a handful of moments, but that one I'll never forget. Okay.
No, that was good. Okay, so with the amount of time that you were deployed, which was a long time, and then you come back for these little stints to see your family, right? What were those? Tell me what those times were like coming back for a week, knowing you were going to come back for a week. What kind of some of the difficulties that you experienced during that time. Transitioning back just for that short period of time to see your kids and how old your kids were, or how many you had at the time, or whatever.
So first deployment, I come back after that 4.5 months, and my daughter is she just turned 2 actually. She turned 2, and it was crazy. My wife had been in a pretty serious accident about a month before I came home, so it didn't matter that I was halfway across the country, maybe halfway around the world. I couldn't come back. So you come back and you go from being an Army guy to being dad again, to being a husband again, and you're only going to be there for 7 or 8 days. So there's really no use in trying to put that mantle back on. You just try and enjoy as much of it as you can. You're not going to come back and reestablish, a different parenting plan. You're not going to come back and reestablish a different level of discipline. You're not going to come back and reestablish habits. Mom's running the house and mom's got things rolling, and you don't dare come back and try and mess up that chemistry, right? It's already a challenge enough that you're coming back after everyone's finally gotten used to the whole of dad being gone. Now you come back and you've got a 2-year-old that knows you, but she doesn't know you like she did. And your wife is super stoked to see you and you're super stoked to see her, but you almost have to compartmentalize it because it's so short. It's for 7, 8, or 8 days. And so you try and just maximize every moment of that. And for me personally, I'm big on compartmentalization, which is a strength and a weakness. So, you do that and you go to deploy and I was gone for 7 months. And when you've got a toddler, that 7 months is huge. And this is 2007. So Skype existed, but man, it's not like we had a ton of internet, so I'd get to see my wife if I was lucky once a week. They had phones, and so we'd talk every couple of days. I'd call her every couple of days and we'd chat, but I'd try to see my wife and my daughter, and it was really hit or miss. If I was lucky, I'd get to see them, once a week, once every couple of weeks, and it's just not the same. A 2-year-old can't connect that. So now she's 2.5. When I come home for my mid-tour, which is 15 days, and again, it's the same thing. It's as if you haven't seen each other in 5 years, it seems like. And so you're just trying to maximize every moment, and you're trying to enjoy time because you don't want to deal with bills. You don't want to deal with stress. You don't deal with whatever because you have 15 days. So you don't want to waste time dealing with all that other jazz. You want to just hang out, and it's kind of bittersweet, right? Because you're not able to maybe take care of some of the stuff that you should take from your spouse. Some share that burden, so they just want to soak up everything with you as well. And then you go back and you compartmentalize. That's the only way you can get through it. Is you can't be distracted and focused on a loved one or a family member, because then you can't focus on your job. And you have an entire crew of people plus a bunch of passengers. Their lives are in your hands. And if you're distracted, you're risking not just your life, but all of theirs. So, you kind of got to compartmentalize to a degree that isn't normal for an average person for the rest of that deployment. And then you come back again, and now you've been gone for basically, out of a roughly a year and a half, you've been home for 3 weeks of it. So, what a mess.
So, coming back from that long deployment, the most difficult thing, transition, if you can pick something out, or a time that was the most difficult for you, where you were like, you just realized how much this deployment had impacted your family. What was that? Can you identify anything like that? Yeah.
I can identify a thing first. The Army calls it op tempo, right? So it's the speed at which you're operating, essentially. And a deployment, op tempo is insane, especially that deployment. During the surge, things were so incredible and just a lot going on. And so you go from living a very, very intense life, literally, not to again be melodramatic, but any day could be your last. And it's different than at home because people are looking to cause you ill will. So you go from living on the absolute edge of hyper awareness to coming home and you just have a 3-year-old that wants to hang out with you. And you just have a wife that wants to have her husband back. And so you go from this guy that's been a cog in a machine that operates at an unrealistic pace for so long that it becomes your mentality. You do anything long enough and it becomes a huge part of your mentality. So you develop this habit to operate at a speed, at an intensity that's 3 or 4 times that of normal. When you come home, you try to go back to normal, and it's difficult to downshift. It's difficult to let go of that intensity. People's lives have been in your balance, in your hands, for so long that it's become a normal thing. And now you come home and you just want to go to the store and get some groceries. So you have not done that in a year and a half. And so one time we're going to get on the freeway. I've got a moment, man. We go to get on the freeway and this guy won't let me in front of him. So I'm like, okay, I'll go in behind you. It's kind of a short spot to get to this on-ramp for the freeway. And I slide in behind him, and it was kind of a tight space. I'm in an SUV, he's in a little tiny car. And the guy kind of brake checks me just to be a jerk. He had kind of messed with me trying to get into that lane to begin with. He brake checks me, and I just kind of lost it. We didn't get in an accident, but we were close. And I literally just saw red. I couldn't believe this guy would be so arrogant to jeopardize my family's well-being. Like, here I am, I've got my 3-year-old in the back, and my wife is in the front. And I just spent a year and a half, a year and 5 months living in an environment where you're so aware of everything that you do benefiting or hurting your brother beside you. You wouldn't dare do something that could jeopardize the soldier to your left or your right. You just don't do arrogant things like that. And here's this guy that wants to be arrogant to kind of prove that he's in a position that he could cause harm to my family. And I literally flipped a switch and I just went red. And I envisioned Dale Earnhardting this guy, just spinning him out, plowing me into this little grassy field to the right, punching his window out and dragging him out of his car and just beating him. Because who in the world would dare put my family in harm's way? I just couldn't fathom it. We're so safety conscious, and we're so aware of protecting our brothers to our left and our right. And here's this guy so willing to cause harm to my family. I just couldn't believe it. And
how obviously you were outwardly expressing that while you were in the car, right?
Yeah.
So how did that go down? Like, tell me about that as far as how your wife was looking at that. Was that a point where she was like, holy cow?
Yeah, that was the moment that I knew. That was the moment that I knew something was wrong. There was like something actually broken inside of me. My wife, we have an awesome marriage, and she couldn't have been farther from me in that car. I remember looking over, and it was like in a movie when they do a special effect to make somebody seem like they're so much farther away. And that's emotionally what happened. My wife couldn't have been physically any further away from me, and she had this almost look of fear in her eyes. And she said, I don't know who you are. You need to get help. And I knew she was right, because I'm not an angry person. I'm an intense guy, but I'm not an angry person. And that was a level of anger that I don't know that I'd ever experienced. And I remember being almost in shock after she said that, because I knew she was right. I couldn't put my finger on anything as to why that happened or why I felt that way. I just knew this guy was out of his freaking mind, and it needed to be fixed. And I was about to fix it for him. So I reached out to Military One Source, because that's the only, I didn't know what to do. I didn't.
How'd you hear about Military One Source?
Thank God for the yellow ribbon ceremonies. They do this in the Army. They have these yellow ribbon events when you come back, and it's all about just kind of shoving information in front of you. And a bunch of it is frustrating because you don't care. You just want to go home. You're just so tired of playing the game. You just want to go home. It's just one more hoop you have to jump, and it's frustrating. But luckily, they force you to do it. And they shove all of these outlets in front of you. Military One Source being kind of the funnel, if you will. You go through, you need financial help, you call Military One Source. You need counseling, you call Military One Source. You need whatever, you call Military One Source, and they can get you the right place. And that's what happened. I think we might have even had like a magnet on our fridge. They had this big one as a magnet, Military One Source, and it has the phone number on it. And I literally didn't know where else to go. I respected guys in my unit, but what was I going to do? Call them and say that I freaked out? Hey, can you help me? No. They're not any more prepared to fix that than I am. We can commiserate. We can sit down and share how we're struggling together, but that's not going to help me get better. So I was interested in getting better. So I called Military One Source. They referred me to the local VA center, and I'm a pretty matter-of-fact dude. If something's broken, let's just get it fixed. I'm not interested in the awkwardness in between. If my leg's broken, I'm not going to hem and haw with the doctor. I'm going to say, let's do what we got to do to get it fixed. So why should it be any different with me emotionally or psychologically? If there's something that's wrong, I want to find out what's wrong and fix it, because I don't want to keep dealing with it being broken. And so I called the Military One Source, and thank God they referred me to somebody local, and I went and sat down with a counselor there, and that was the beginning of an incredibly fruitful relationship.
Okay, so we're going to get into the kind of the nuts and bolts of, when did you start drinking and why? Now, you mentioned the MIP when you were a kid or young, and so is that something that you kind of, all right, I'll share with you a little bit about my family. My family, genetically, we have an addictive nature. I told you about my brother. My whole family's, my dad died from alcohol at 42 years old. My family dealt drugs. I got family, but anyway, it's an addictive nature. So I don't know, but kind of what I'm looking for is just, when did you start drinking and why? If you can remember, how that got started, if it was something that you just kind of casually did, or if there was, something that.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead.
I don't know a date, so to speak, when I noticed that I was drinking way more than I should have been, but definitely within probably a month after I'd been back, I just realized that I was having a hard time coping with being back. I was having a hard time fitting back in the way that I used to fit in. I looked at my life as I had put my life on pause, and I thought I could just leave for a year and a half, go do this thing, and come back and hit resume, and it would be okay. But the problem was that I had changed in that timeline, and so I kept trying to put this puzzle piece back in this puzzle, and it wasn't fitting, and it was very frustrating that it wouldn't fit. And I don't think I had many productive outlets at the time, and drinking was one of those things that you can either do intentionally or unintentionally to self-medicate. You can be visually, or you could be aware of that and say, okay, I'm going to escape from this, or it can just be a really easy go-to. When you're reaching for something that's comforting, alcohol has a tendency to take the edge off. Well, the problem is that you go from taking the edge off to it becoming that escape to a certain degree. So you go from drinking a couple of beers here and there to take the edge off to you're kind of drinking all the time. And you're kind of drinking to deal with stuff because things aren't working the way they're supposed to. We had some pay issues when I came back. Big surprise. Anyone's ever been in the National Guard, especially. But we had some pay issues there, and it caused some serious friction for us. And it got so bad financially, and young guy, deployed. I wasn't irresponsible, but I certainly wasn't anywhere near as responsible as I could have been financially. And so we came back and didn't have nearly as much money in the bank as we should have. But came back and after 3 or 4 months, 5 months being back, because these pay issues had basically stopped the pay that several of us should have been continuing to see, I ended up nearly homeless. And how do you face stuff like that? You have a choice. It's kind of that fight or flight, and sometimes it's back and forth between the two. Sometimes it's harder to deal with reality than it is to escape. Sometimes it's easier to just kind of like ignore it and hope that it goes away.
Hold on a second, let me check, make sure. Okay, so let's go back to that. I'm going to shorten you up.
Okay.
It was basically you thought you could come back from that deployment, just kind of you hit the pause button, just kind of resume that, but the transition was not as simple as that. You encountered some problems with financially and stuff like that. Is that kind of when more of the drinking started taking place, as far as you had drank before,
yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But now it just got to be the kind of the go-to thing at this point. Or?
I think maybe that's probably an even better way of wording. I had enjoyed drinking before and having a good time, but the motivation was a little different. So you go to a habit, or you go to something that used to be a way for you to decompress, and then you're abusing it. That's really what it comes down to.
So when did you, and that's at that point when did you realize it was starting to become a problem? You know what I mean? Like when you identify, you're like, this is a problem.
Yeah. Okay. That was when we were almost homeless. It just hit me. Here I am, a grown man, and I've got a family to provide for, and my world's falling apart. We're literally almost homeless. If it would have been another day or two without the help we got from the vet center, we would have been evicted. And that's literally sobering. So, do you want to go back and run through that then, or?
Yeah, no, that was good.
Okay.
That part was good right there. Yep, you already covered that. Let's see. You covered when you finally decided to reach out for help. Now, one source, when you went to see one source after that incident in the car, was that just something that was just for the deployment portion of it? Did you go to military one source for the alcohol portion of it?
I just called one source the one time, right, and to let them know I needed help. And they plugged me into, they referred me to there's a VA center locally. And so I called them and scheduled an appointment, and the dominoes just fell from there. They were able to, so when I met the counselor, we started with, kind of that incident where I lost it and realized that something was crazy. And we just discussed everything. I mean, he did such a good job of really digging through symptoms to get to the root of what was going on and the challenges that I was facing and how I was handling those things. And one of them was obviously, you can't turn to alcohol as a problem solver. It's never going to solve your problems. It's just going to delay you facing them. And so I was so fortunate that there was a counselor that was interested in my well-being, that was willing to ask those tough questions that I didn't feel comfortable discussing with anyone in my unit. I didn't feel comfortable just opening myself up to these men that knew me, these men that I deployed with, and saying, hey man, I'm broken, I'm really struggling, I don't know what to do, here's my pride, I'm just going to get it out of the way, can you help me? I didn't feel that they had the answers that I needed necessarily. And luckily, this counselor that I had seen really helped me put the right pieces in place. And so they were able to help us with a financial piece to make sure that we didn't end up homeless. He was able to, just put me in all these right places to deal with the things I was struggling with. And I was able to see that I was using alcohol as a medication, as an escape, as opposed to it being a benefit. And when somebody is able to put that in front of you, and you're able to see that the choices you're making are hurting your family instead of helping yourself, then you get to have a real honest conversation with yourself. Who are you as a man? Who are you as an example? Who are you to make those choices? Are you going to put yourself first? Or are you going to put others first? And I love the Army's definition of a warrior. The Army changed their attitude to more of a warrior mentality for the wars, and they defined a warrior as one willing to close the gap. And I just took that personally. I just said that's the right attitude. It's not just about a fist fight or a gunfight or a knife fight. It's about how was I living my life? Was I willing to close the gap, the integrity gap? Was I willing to grow as a man? Was I willing to seek help as a man? Or was I going to ignore the gap and let it own me? And so that's the best illustration to me of how that wound, so to speak, began to heal.
Did you, at any point, it's a common thing to try and get help, or especially being in the military, sometimes you get worried about your career being in jeopardy by coming forward. Did you ever feel like that at any point? Like, hey, if I'm asking to get all this help, are they going to think, oh, this guy's messed up, we'll help him, but his career is going to be like, yeah, we don't know if we want this guy. Did you ever struggle with any of that as far as coming forward? Or you were more concerned with your family, and that was...
No, that career piece was there. That fear was there. Obviously, my family was the most important thing. So I knew I needed to get help. So I was leery about maybe how much to share at first. Because so often, you hear these stories of guys that are being honest, and it turns out to be career suicide. They whether they get chaptered out or they just get kind of labeled one way or another. There's been a stigma affiliated with so many things that the Army has completely changed their attitude and their demeanor to encourage it. Right? We've had so many people that have committed suicide because they haven't been able to go find help. They're not willing to go find help so often. And that's one of the first things we talked about was how far does this go? Who does this get shared with? How does this work? And the counselor was prior service, so he spoke my language. He understood that those fears existed, and he was very upfront about, look, none of this ever leaves this room to your chain of command unless A, you say it does, or B, you're an absolute threat to somebody in your unit. So that was never an issue for me. So very quickly he put to rest my fears of this is going to haunt you, this is going to ruin your career, this is going to be a black mark on you, and people are going to see you as weak. And I called my squad leader to let him know, hey man, I just want to give you a heads up. I'm seeing somebody, I'm getting some help, and he may reach out to you just to let you know, or just to get some feedback, whatever, but I don't want you to be blindsided. And he said, is there anything you want to talk about? I said, no man, I'm good. And he left it at that. He respected me for being strong enough to go get help instead of being weak and hiding it.
Okay, so your situation now, you got the help that and I'm assuming that you got the help that you needed. So what's it like now? So how are you doing now? How are things looking? How things are looking in regards to your career? Kind of give us, hey, you've gone through these things, gotten some help. How's things looking for you now?
So before we go to that, I did have another personal issue happen about a year ago, and I went back to One Source or the VA Center. I went back to them for something different. Do you want me to touch on that at all?
Sure. No,
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. So about a year ago, I was dealing with suicidal thoughts, and that's obviously a huge thing in the veteran community, and it was a weird, frightening thing to go through. And again, I wasn't sure who to reach out to, but that counselor, and I hadn't seen that counselor in a couple of years, I reached out to him, and I just told him, hey, I'm really struggling. I've got this going on. I don't know what to do. Can you help me out? And he said, absolutely. He cleared a spot for me, and I got in, I saw him, and here's a guy I hadn't talked to in like 4 years, maybe 5 years, and it was as if we had talked last week. He remembered everything. He remembered my kids. He remembered my wife. And I'm sure he had notes to check, but here's this guy that I haven't talked to in a handful of years, and it was literally as if we had talked last week. And we had this conversation, and I just spilled my guts to him and just told him everything I was going through, and he sat there in awe of me. There was no judgment. There was no condemnation. And he just said, hey, some of this is beyond my scope. Let me plug you into some people that can really help you turn the corner on this. And he just told me how grateful he was and how proud of me he was for making that decision to reach out instead of fight it on my own. And he told me how many times he had heard the exact same story that I told, and the difference between my story and the other people that had sat on that exact same couch and told that story was that I hadn't tried to actually kill myself. I caught myself before actually pulling the trigger. I caught myself before doing something terrible. And he said it was just frightening to hear somebody that he knew going through that, and the thought of them maybe not reaching out and then seeing me on the news. And it was just, again, it was super sobering to realize this happens to anybody. It's no respecter of persons. Depression, sadness, whatever. I've got a great career. I've got an incredible family, a wonderful marriage. We've been married over 11 years, 4 beautiful, healthy children. I'm the poster child of non-suicidal looking stereotype. I am the guy. And to go through that, and I shared that actually with my unit, and you should have seen the faces, the mouths of the guys to my left and my right. And they were blown away to hear that could happen to somebody. 22 veterans a day kill themselves. It's not all people running around depressed and hating life and giving away their cars. Sometimes it's literally the guy to your right whose life looks perfect. And my squad leader was literally sitting to my left in the classroom that day when I shared with my unit that I had almost killed myself. And he was dumbfounded. He was apologetic to me that he hadn't noticed. And I told him there's nothing to apologize for. It's not always textbook. It's not always someone's giving away their favorite possession. So you should be aware that maybe they're depressed. Sometimes stuff just really is beneath the surface, and nobody knows how to share that if it is beneath the surface. So that's why I'm so grateful for the Yellow Ribbon and OneSource and the VA centers and the men and women that put themselves out there to be available resources, because they literally saved my life. They were literally the buffer between me and that edge of that cliff, and put me in contact with the specific people to help turn that around. And it's been incredible. I've had just an absolute amazing recovery since that time.
Okay, so my last question is going to be, if you could talk to anybody in the Guard who's struggling with substance abuse issues right now, what would you tell them?
If you're struggling with substance abuse, seek help. You know, it's one of those deals where we had this stigma that it's weak to need help. It's not weak to go to the doctor. It's not weak to seek treatment when you have an ailment. Why is this any different? It's a silly stigma that we've created that it's weak to need help. So if you're trying to fix it on your own, you're setting yourself up for failure. And there's no two ways about it. This is a challenge. First of all, you don't have to fight alone. And B, you shouldn't fight alone. You don't fight any other battle alone in the service. You never go at this by yourself. You've got a battle buddy, you've got a squad, you've got a unit, you've got a whatever. You never fight anything on your own. Everybody knows that's the weakest place to be. It's the most vulnerable you can be. Don't do it here. Don't struggle with this on your own. There are people that are happy to help, and there are people that will be so much more proud of you for pulling through by getting help than to think, gosh, what a weak dude, what a weak soldier, what a weak whatever. He had to go get help. No, they're going to think that you're weak when you're in jail because you got a DUI. They're going to think that you're weak because you beat your kids or you beat your wife. You did something terrible. That's when they're going to see a weak man. The people that I've shared my story with have literally told me how proud they were of my strength, because it's hard to humble yourself and say you need help.